Yeah, you don't have to get anything, you just support.
Okay. Thanks, appreciate that.
Okay.
So today we're going to talk about relationships, and this is one I think is good for a lot of us. Not just if we're looking for a relationship, but even if we're evaluating the relationships we're in. So last week we talked about community, so Jen talked about the need to build community, why we need to do that, why it's important. But a lot of that starts with the individual relationships, right? And a lot of times we get into relationships for a couple of reasons. One of them might be that we're afraid of being alone, and this is friendships or romantic relationships, or because we just happen to fall into that relationship, right? Could just be a matter of proximity. You run into people, you're hanging out with certain people at school because you happen to fall together. But I think rarely do we take the time to evaluate the friendships and relationships that we have to say, do these help me meet my goals, whatever those goals happen to be, assuming, of course, we have goals. So I thought that would be a good thing to talk about today is why we have relationships, what they should do for us, how do we engage in them, and what's kind of required to keep a relationship going. I think most of us understand that as we grow as adults, relationships aren't automatic things, right? They require work, whether that's a friendship or a romantic relationship. So the first part of that is goals. So from my perspective, relationships should be based on goals, right? Whether that's to have a friendship that helps you get better at whatever it is that you want to do or be, right? So we've talked about before, the 5 people you spend the most time with influence how you are going to handle a situation or are going to help you with building good habits. So are your friendships actually helping you along those lines? So knowing what your goals are, right? And then being realistic in your goals, both for yourself and for your relationships, right? So if your goal in a relationship is that someone's going to do everything for you, that might be a little bit of an unrealistic goal, right? Or if your goal is that, you're going to marry a supermodel, right? That might be an unrealistic goal, probably a bit of a shallow one. So depending on who it is you're marrying. And then here's the important thing that I think a lot of times we leave out of the conversations, and I see this a lot in society today, particularly with younger men, is that you also have to fit into somebody else's goals, right? So you have to be worthy of someone else's goals to be in a mutually beneficial relationship. And so that means not only being realistic with your own goals and with what it is you're trying to achieve in a relationship, but with yourself and being honest with yourself and asking, do I fit in someone else's vision of their goals in a relationship, and how would that match up with my goals? So if you're looking for a certain kind of person who's a certain kind of way, are you the kind of person that person wants to be with? I think that's a hard question to ask, but important, because a lot of times we're going to suffer significant disappointment if we haven't oriented our goals in being realistic and then understanding that we ourselves have to fit into those goals in that goal set. And that goes to the next thing is realize that you might be the reason you're alone. That's a kind of a harsh thing to say. But within the framework of the church, again, we start with ourselves, then we go out to other people, then we go out to the community. So if we look inward and we reflect and say, am I the person that someone else wants to be with? And there may be things about yourself that you hold very strongly that are important to you, and they should be, because never should you change the core of who you are to fit someone else's, an arbitrary someone else's mindset or goal set. But instead, realize that things have to be negotiated to be mutually beneficial in a relationship. I would consider myself to have a great marriage. You saw Jen last week. She's articulate, intelligent, good looking, etc. But we do not have an automatically perfect and smooth relationship. We have to work at things. We have arguments. We have discussions. We have mismatches of expectations from time to time. We have to work through those. So in going into any relationship, it makes sense that you're going to have to negotiate some things, and some of those things are going to have to do with you. So think about that. Now, at the same time, one more point on that. No one loves an asshole, right? That's what it comes down to. I heard someone talking about the other day that they had a friend or something who was complaining about everyone else being an asshole. And if everyone else around you is an asshole, you might be the asshole. right? It's probably not everybody else. Everybody else is likely not the problem. Statistically, that's improbable. So it's probably you. It's just something that I think is important to think of every once in a while. If you're questioning why you're alone or why you don't have friends, it might be because it's you. Or it might be that you're not putting yourself in the place where you're going to meet the kind of people who meet your goals. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So in terms of being alone, one of the key things that you have to be able to do is accept being alone for a period of time. A lot of people get into relationships that are unhealthy because they're afraid of loneliness. And it's a tough thing. We are social creatures, right? We've talked about that a number of times in our services. But that doesn't mean that we must have the attention of society and of a community at all times, right? We need to be able to be strong as individuals to be able to contribute to the community. And so that means that we have to be able to deal with some loneliness, particularly if being alone helps us to meet our goal of having a good relationship, one that's beneficial to us. And that is a hard thing because from a very young age, right, we get put into school because that's what everybody else does. And so we're used to being around people who are like us for a long time. And we see other people who have relationships and it seems like they're happy. Often they are not, but it seems like it. And so we get conditioned to think we have to be with someone. We have to get married, right? In the military, this shows up a lot where people get married very, very young and a lot of times before they really even know each other. And it's unfortunate because it leads to a lot of divorce, which is, not a fun thing for anyone. But that means that we have to be okay with being alone first. I personally have spent a fair amount of time alone growing up throughout my years. And I'm an introvert, so that was a little bit more okay with me. I didn't mind as much. Did I get lonely? Absolutely. Did I wish at times that I had a girlfriend? Absolutely. But I realized that there were some relationships that had I entered into them, it would have been a detriment to me. And there were some relationships that I terminated that were a detriment, and I realized that I would be better off alone. And it's a hard thing to do because a lot of times we're afraid of the unknown. We'd rather take the known bad that we have than the unknown bad that we imagine is incredibly terrible. So consider that, and consider that for your friends as well. If you have someone around you who is alone and they're afraid, or if they enter into repeated bad relationships, talk to them about it. Say, hey, being alone isn't as bad as you think. And then also let them know that they might be the problem. So that fear of being alone, that drives those bad decisions, right? And so it gets us into situations where then we are giving everything to the other party. We're not entering into negotiations on our own behalf and saying, hey, this is what I need to be satisfied in this relationship. So that's something I think that's very critical. There's a great podcast. The podcast is called The Art of Manliness. And it's not really about being manly in the stereotypical sense of macho. It's more about being a good adult. And there was a really great talk on there about loneliness and about how to interact with people and how to reorient your expectations. So I'd recommend people check it out. I thought it was a valuable podcast. And we have to realize that we need to go out, we need to negotiate, and we need to have open discussions when we go into relationships. We talked a little bit about that in the conflict communication service. But this stuff is hard, right? Especially as an adult, it's not automatic. So how do you meet people as an adult, right? So this group, right, we found each other online. So we found a group of like-minded people, we got together and we're having these discussions, and ideally we're becoming better people because of it, because we're exposing ourselves to ideas that are a little bit different, even within the confines of humanism or agnosticism. So again, we set goals, right? So when we went out to find this group of people, we set the goal of, I want to find people who are like me in this way, right? Your goals could be whatever you want them to be, whatever's going to help you achieve your personal goals. But that's the first way to do it, is be a little bit of an engineer, right? Be a little bit of a planner and say, I really want to go out and I want to find these people, right? Where do these people hang out? Maybe I can find them online. Maybe I can find them in Meetup or Facebook, or maybe I can join some sort of a club, right? Whether it's Toastmasters or a volunteer organization. So you gotta have a plan, because it's not as simple as falling into good friendships and good relationships. And then there's an exercise that I had done with a group of younger folks as I was doing some counseling with, and the exercise is you set up your must-haves, your cannot-haves, and your negotiables. So in a romantic relationship, that might look like my must-haves are someone who values, like a clean house, for instance, or likes to be active, or whatever it is, enjoys comedy, has a sense of humor. That's a must-have. And then a cannot have would be like someone who smokes. Like for me, like they can't smoke. Like that's a no-go. I can't deal with that. And then negotiables might be the number of kids, right? So maybe your must-haves is someone who wants kids, but your negotiables is how many. Now it's for a more romantic relationship, but even for a friendship. If you're looking for someone who has your same religious or not religious mindset, right? That's fair. And maybe that's only for a subset of your friends, but maybe you want to just have a set of friends that meets that. And then your cannot haves are someone who's an asshole or someone who puts others down, right? And then your negotiables could be a variety of other things. But I think it's important that we have these goals before we go out, because otherwise we're guessing. Does this person meet a criteria which I've not really defined, right? For romantic relationships, online dating, right? So there are many funny memes out there about online dating. So Jen and I met online dating. We met on Match.com. I like that one in particular because you can search for people and filter with certain characteristics. So for me, religion was one of those things. The other websites kind of just assigned you people, and most of them were religious. And so I'd meet them and be like, all right, you're religious, this isn't gonna work out. So that was something that was helpful to me, because I went through an exercise in my head. I'm like, how do I meet women that I would be interested in? So I was, at the time, about 27, I was looking for a longer term relationship. I felt that I was ready to settle down. So I wanted something where we were gonna be compatible. And so I kind of did my must-haves, cannot-haves, negotiables, and then searched for it, basically. And I don't know, for me, I was trying to think, how does a reasonable person find people? I don't want to go to a bar. I'm not much of a drinker, and that's not particularly where I want a relationship to start. Usually people there are not there to make good decisions. So I kind of put that one aside. I really like reading and intellectual exercises, so I was thinking the library, but you can't really meet people in the library. That's kind of creepy to walk up to someone like, hey, I also read that book. Would you like to go out on a date? And they'd be like, get away from me or I will pepper spray you. That's probably not a good start to a relationship. So I kind of came down to, there's online dating, and then there's volunteer organizations and sports activities, because I was looking for someone who's relatively active. So I joined, I think, a kickball league. I also I was in a sailing club that was free, which was nice. And then also, no, it was somewhere else actually. And then online dating. So I wrote up a very long, actually wrote my profile to dissuade people from contacting me. Not that I'm a lot to look at or anything, but I had a good job, I make good money, I'm a reasonably put together guy, and so there were people who would take advantage of that. And I said, I'm looking for very specific qualities, and I think that's important. I think we should be discerning in what it is and who it is we're looking for in our lives. And so Jen actually, she winked at me. She initiated that relationship. She sent me a wink through MASH. So I like to poke fun at her for doing that. But it all worked out. And we'll be married 8 years in December. And I think that's important, because it's not that online dating is the way, but that it was a way to be reasoned about the interaction that we have and to kind of set expectations ahead of time. Because a lot of times we go out and we look for chemistry, right? I personally think love has two pieces. This is kind of my philosophy on love. Love has two pieces. The first is chemistry, and that's kind of the thing that you read about, think about. It's that physical attraction. It's that spark or flame, which is actually chemistry, right? So pheromones and all that. And then the other part is the compatibility piece, the logical piece. So to me, when you're going out and doing online dating, you line up the logical pieces first, and then you basically just filter everybody else out. So if you're not logically compatible, at least on paper, all right, if we were going into a bar, it'd be like everybody else is now gone, and there are only 3 or 4 people left in the bar, if we were using that as our space, that then you can have conversations with to see which is the most compatible or which one has chemistry, and then you've met both pieces. But unfortunately, a lot of times we go out, we find chemistry first, and that of course gets kind of gets in the way. It interferes with our ability to use our frontal cortex. And then we get into a relationship, and then it's hard to separate from that relationship when we realize that it's not logical, that we're not compatible. So I'm a big fan of doing the reverse, just kind of going in there, having all the conversations that are inappropriate to have right up front, right? The, religion, money, politics, sex. Those should be like the first thing that you talk about when you're out to meet someone for the purpose of particularly a romantic relationship. Maybe that might be awkward for friendships, but I've done this, and it does put people off a little bit. But to be honest, the people that I'm interested in are people who are a bit more logical, and it worked out for me. So that's a framework to consider when going out and trying to find somebody that you might be interested in. But also be open-minded and focused on your goals. If you're really clear in your must-haves, cannot-haves, and negotiables, you realize that those things are fairly limited. Like most things fall in the negotiable category. And you might meet someone that you wouldn't imagine yourself with, because a lot of us imagine us with people who look like us, like people who we grew up around, right? But imagine, or if someone's meeting all your logical categories and there does seem to be some chemistry, be open-minded, because I think that helps us really meet our goals. And that's what it's about. If you have goals and they're clear, it helps, because you can kind of let everything else fall away and you realize it's not important. There's a good story in the Atlantic that I'll link afterward that just came out a few days ago, actually. And it's about how to make friends, particularly how to make friends as adults. So it's got some really good step-by-step tips in there on how you do it, how to engage in small talk, things like that. Some great podcasts about it too. So I talked about love, chemistry, and logic. Sort for logical first. 1, it makes the most sense, and 2, it saves you from getting into relationships that it's difficult to extract yourself from. And then, so what are the characteristics of good long-term relationships? People are going to say that, it was love at first sight and it was magical and blah, 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 and that's all crap. It's great if it was, fantastic. That's a bonus, but that is not, from my perspective, what's going to get you there in the long run, right? The things that I found, and these are things I counsel people when I do weddings, is it's really compromise or negotiation, work, and having common goals, right? There's not a lot in there about having the same activities or being introverted or extroverted or whatever it is. It's about those things. Now, there are some compatibility things that would be very difficult to work through. If you've ever read 5 Love Languages or similar things that talk about personalities, if you've got significantly different languages and it's hard for you to give love or affection in the way that they need, that's really difficult to overcome. Probably not impossible, but would take extra work. But realize that no matter what method or language people speak or what their needs are, it's going to require work. And this is true for both romantic relationships and friendships. So we've got to realize going into them that we have to do the work, and particularly as we're adults and we spend time apart, right? We move around for jobs and our friends grow away from us, that we need to continue to invest in the relationships that are valuable to us. And that takes work. And sometimes it takes deliberate work, and sometimes we get reminded that maybe we haven't put in enough work and we've got to do a little bit of catch up. That's always going to happen, I think, in relationships. Open communication helps it, right? Because then you're having conversations more often when things go wrong or when someone has a problem. But even if it does get bottled up for a while, having that open communication says, hey, I'm not feeling it right now. I'm not feeling that you're putting in the work. And a lot of times the other party just hasn't been paying attention, right? They just let it slide a bit. And it's not that they were malicious in their, or negligent necessarily. They just need a little bit of a kick in the pants to say, you know what, you're right. I haven't been contributing as much or whatever it happens to be. And so I think it's important to have that open communication. We've talked about that already. But work is absolutely critical for all relationships. And it's hard, especially if you're used to being alone because you're used to just taking care of you. And a lot of times I've met people and I've seen people who are alone and they don't want to be alone, but they also don't want to put in the effort for relationships. And so, again, you got to realize that sometimes it's you that's keeping you from being in a relationship. So compromise, work, common goals. I think that's basically it for those things, or for a good relationship. And then if you want it, right? So what about bad relationships, right? So we put in the work for our relationships that we have, and we want to have good relationships, and we want to help people in our community, whether it's our circle of friends or the broader community. But what about those relationships that are bad, right? So abusive relationships, or if there's some things that are fundamentally incompatible. So the last girl I had dated before I met Jen is one of those things where the chemistry, kicked off nicely. She's very sweet. We got along well. There were no problems per se, but she's very religious and I was very not. And I knew that we were not going to end up together. And so, in retrospect, I should have not started the relationship. But having someone there to be with and comfort you is nice, right? And so we ended up breaking up within a couple of weeks because I realized I'm looking for someone to settle down with, and this is not it. So you're very nice, very sweet, but we're going to have to part ways. And that was tough because usually relationships break off because something bad has happened, right? Or it's gone its course, or things are really bad. But it wasn't in this case. It was just incompatibility. So there are reasons to end relationships. And now if it's gone something where it's a marriage or it's with children, that takes a lot of thought, right? That takes a lot of thought to realize this is not going to work out because the other person doesn't want it, right? Or there's a fundamental incompatibility here. So I know people who have been in marriages where there was never one giant thing that was wrong, clearly this is the point, but it was more things built up over time. People weren't contributing around the house, weren't striving to get a career and really contribute, just kind of being a kid, basically, until the point where all of the stuff added up to the point where it's not the one thing. It's not I didn't cut the grass, or I didn't do the dishes, or didn't whatever. It's this string of, I'm not contributing to the relationship. And at that point, they had to make the call, I'm moving in this direction and you're not going anywhere. And so, getting the counseling and those sorts of things, and if they're not going to pull their weight, you got to let them go. And so those decisions are tough, and I'm only going to touch on them briefly because we could do a whole discussion on that. But it's something where, on one hand, you want to invest and you want to help people along, right? And you want to get them help, and you want to see if you can salvage good relationships. But on the other hand, if they're not going to do the work, right? Work takes both parties, and so does compromise. Then there's nothing you can do about that. You can only control yourself. You can set a good example. You can do all the things to try and help them along, but you cannot change other people. And so sometimes that decision has to be made. And of course, in the case of abuse, that one's pretty clear. So there's for those of you who are in relationships where you're questioning maybe whether or not it's an abusive cycle, go look up the cycle of abuse, because it follows a pretty predictable pattern of where in the beginning things are okay, and then things get bad, and there's abuse, whether it's physical, verbal, sexual. And then, of course, they apologize afterwards. They'll say they'll never do it again. They'll make it up to you and be very sweet and charming. You'll go into the honeymoon phase. And then, of course, it starts over again, right? And they do this on purpose. They make you feel worthless. They put you down in the abusive cycle. So you feel that you could not escape. You could not do well in another relationship. So I wanted to make that point for people who might be listening or who might be experiencing that, because it's really difficult to escape. They try and put you in a psychological trap to keep you there. And so it's really important to think critically about it and to say, is this what's happening to me? Ask them to get help. Ask them to get counseling with you. A lot of times they won't. because they know what it is that they're doing. So I just wanted to offer that sort of as a little bit of a public service announcement that it's a really important thing, and it is so difficult to break out of. So, but for the most part, other than those cases where people are abusive, a lot of times people in our relationships don't know. They don't understand. They are ignorant of our position a lot of times because we don't tell them, right? So stereotype, this is the stereotype that we hold about women, of course, right? That women think that we should know what it is that they want when they haven't told us, right? Or they drop hints and we're not necessarily good at picking them up, right? But this is true of everybody, to be honest. We're very bad at communicating our expectations, just coming out and saying, this is what I would like. These are the things that work for me. So when you're engaging in a relationship, whether it's a friendship or otherwise, be clear. Be clear what you want. If your friend invites you to go, to a baseball game, this is what the podcast was talking about. If they say, hey, do you want to go to a baseball game on Sunday? Don't be like, oh, well, I'm busy on Sunday if you're not busy on Sunday. Because they're going to be like, oh, well, it's running, it's a series all week. How about Tuesday? And you're like, well, crap, I can't be busy both Sunday and Tuesday. Like they're going to catch on. Just tell them like, hey, baseball is not really a thing I'm interested in. But I would like to go hiking and I'm free on this day. Would you like to do that? Right? Or in a romantic relationship, explain that, hey, I'm not really into concerts. So personally, I'm not really into concerts. I don't like going out with huge amounts of people where it's really loud. Just not my thing. So every once in a while, Jen and I will go to a concert because I will do that for her. I will negotiate that, right? I don't just say, oh, no, this is a cannot have. I have been to concerts. But there are some times where she wants to go to like a certain one. I say, hey, can you get a group of friends maybe and go with them instead, right? I just set the expectation for her because I don't enjoy it, right? And as long as she can still get it, right? She's not abandoned in that. That's a fair negotiation. And vice versa. Sometimes I want to stay home, and so we'll negotiate that way. I don't usually win, but that's okay. It's fine though, actually. So she one of her jobs, quote unquote, is to actually get me to go out and do things. I enjoy talking with people. I just don't enjoy getting up off the couch to go do it. So it's that first step. So she's we balance each other well in that way. But when it comes to people, I try and live by the saying, never attribute to malice what you can attribute to stupidity or ignorance, right? So people are rarely mean. They're rarely doing things to be mean, but just because they're not paying attention, right? Or they just don't know. So I think it's important to be generous in our relationships and then communicate clearly, right? Because I think that's helpful to everybody when we're not guessing anymore. Oh, well, I invited such and such, but they didn't show up, and I don't know if they hate me or, whatever. It's like, well, maybe they were just busy and forgot. Right, so let's be generous in that way. We've talked about this before, practice, grace and forgiveness. If they're your friend and they contribute goodness to your life and they do something wrong, just forgive them, right? Now, if it becomes a trend and they're no longer contributing goodness to your life, then, maybe forget them totally. But a lot of times we just forgive them for what they've done and just move along. Like sometimes we have conversations and discussions that don't go well, or we strongly disagree and we get frustrated, or, somebody's asking for something that we don't want to give, but we feel beholden and we do it anyway. And then we, begrudge, feel begrudging toward that, right? But a lot of times that's our fault, again, for not communicating. So let's forgive our friends. Let's be gracious with them, and then help them along by communicating clearly. So kind of another thing along those lines is from one of our different services, is people are kind of basically good. And they do mostly what they think is right. And they might not have the whole picture for how you fit into that. So usually they're doing what they think is the right thing for them at the time. So I think that helps us to be a little bit more forgiving and be a little bit more gracious to them. So wrapping up sort of the theoretical portion, when it comes to relationships, they require deliberate maintenance, right? They require the work. So it's important for us to do the work, have the discussions that are hard and contentious. That's what it requires. And then also be clear and realistic what your expectations are for those relationships. Whether it's with your friends, what you're interested in, what you're looking for, etc. Be clear with those things. In your romantic relationships, especially. And people do grow and change over time. So update each other, right? Hey, here's where we're at now. Now we've got kids. Now what does everything look like? Have those conversations. And then finally, again, you can't change other people. You can't change the people in your relationship. But you can be the example that you want to see in them and in others. So if you are that example, a lot of times people will realize that you have something going. They'll realize that you seem happier and balanced and whatever it happens to be. And they'll respond to that and say, hey, I've noticed that you're doing really well. What's going on with you? And then you can explain to them, hey, this is just how I've been kind of acting about things and how I've been thinking about my life, my interactions, and it seems to be working out pretty well. And then you can, a lot of times, get them to kind of follow along. So with that, I actually want to open it up more for conversation this time, because relationships are probably the most difficult thing we do, to be honest. Communication is a huge part of that, and it is hard. We miscommunicate constantly. We've talked about that a couple of times. So I just want to see if people have experiences they want to share, or just want to talk about problem sets, because I think it's important and a really tough thing.
Just for your dating thing, a real good rule of thumb is to remember that people are only as interesting as they are interested. And that pretty much holds true. And the other thing about what kind of person in dating, marriage, etc., you have to listen when people tell you who they really are.
Mm-hmm.
Projection, but the common thing, I counseled quite a while at LSUS in the counseling center, psychological, not just student, and learned assertiveness with iMessages, but you have to learn to listen completely separately.
Mm-hmm.
If someone calls you a liar and you have never lied to them, you know that. It makes no difference what they say. They have just told you that they will lie to you. That's projection. Someone accuses you of cheating and you've never cheated. Don't defend yourself. Don't try to prove anything to
Right.
them. Stop it right there and understand that person will cheat you.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with theft, okay, and emotional blackmail. So those things are tough. And you're talking about the work in marriage. Next Friday is our 46th wedding anniversary.
Thursday.
Next Thursday.
See, that's communication. Communication right there happening.
But when someone asks me, well, what's the hardest year of marriage, I just tell them point blank, it's whatever year you're in.
Mm-hmm.
It's a
Yeah,
constant.
and they think that's a negative thing. But we did just like you said. We sat down with pieces of paper before we got married, and we defined each other's roles, what we expected, what I expected of a wife, what she expected of a husband, and we renegotiated that several times.
Yep.
Oh boy, have
But that's thank you. It's a great example. Congratulations, by the way. So 46, you said?
No, she looked at you, not me.
46.
46.
Yeah.
Yeah. So 46 years marriage is a long time, and that's excellent because, like you said, you've had to renegotiate several times.
Oh yeah.
Because you think about it, when you're
Marriage is an evolution.
right,
You evolve and then you change and you, as it goes forward or not,
right,
it's a constant.
yep. Because you think about, so when did you get married? How old were you?
I was 18.
18 and
Yeah, I was 20.
20, right?
And we
So
are-
yeah, who were you when you were 18 and 20?
Well, I was an airman.
You know, that's a good question because I barely knew myself at that point in time.
Exactly.
You stop
For
in
judgment.
hindsight,
very
look
poor.
back at, where you are now and in respect where you were then. You don't even have a chance to know who you really are
No.
at 18.
Her judgment was extremely poor.
Yeah, we can see. I mean,
I came from the New York area.
Yeah.
And she thought this place that used to be here called Shakey's was good pizza. So I immediately made a note of that, so I have to teach her how to eat.
yeah. So, but I think that's a terrific example because, when I think of myself at 18, and I didn't get married until I was 27, I was very, very glad that I had waited that long because I had time. So for those of you who don't know, the brain doesn't stop growing until you're about 25, 26, depending if you're male or female, right around that range, which is why your insurance goes down for the last time when you're 25, right? That's why they do it. Mm-hmm. Yep, that's why you get the last insurance drop. And I think when you get married, it goes down a little bit again because there's actuarial tables. But when you're 25 is when the big drop happens because that's when you can do full long-term risk evaluation and decision making.
Yeah.
So that's when people are fully adult, when they're 25 through 27-ish. And so I was grateful that I had that opportunity I had some relationships, and honestly, just earlier that year, I had learned what I consider to really be the final lesson, not that you ever stop learning, but the final big lesson that I needed before I got married. And that lesson was that it doesn't matter if you're right or wrong, it does matter if you hurt their feelings. And you have to apologize for hurting their feelings, even if you didn't intend it. You don't have to apologize for being wrong, because you may not have been wrong about whatever thing you said. But if they interpret it in a way that hurts their feelings, you have to validate their feelings before you can get anywhere else. And I had not learned that lesson until that year, just earlier in that year. And if I had not learned that, I don't think I would have been a fully capable husband, to be honest. So, but I can only imagine, so I'm now 35, and I have evolved in my understanding of relationships even since then, in the almost 8 years we've been married. So I can only imagine in 46 years, how many like phases of life have you gone through and had to recalibrate, right? And just to think how much the world has changed in that time and what's different, what the expectations are.
Your compromises become different too as you go
Absolutely.
along the way. So, yeah.
So I think that is a terrific point so thank you. I could not have planned that better in terms of an illustration, but that it's required you to renegotiate, but you've done it successfully, right? And that doesn't mean that you have been perfectly happy for 46 years.
No,
I'm
we've
sure
had
there
a lot of bumps.
right, but that's the key, because in having those bumps, you realize that there are good times and there are less good times, and
Sure.
you can recover from them, right? That work works. It's not magic. It's not a thing that just happens. It's a thing that you do and create.
But to add a little bit to that to me, and I'm seeing so much of it today, is relationships are so disposable.
Mm.
It's just like a marriage is disposable.
Right.
Because they don't want to put the work in.
Yeah.
It's
And I think a lot of that comes back to being a little bit selfish.
Yeah.
Right? The people want what they want, and they're told, and unfortunately don't maybe think about it, that, oh, it's going to be magic, right? It's just going to happen, and everything's going to match up, and there's somebody just for you out there, which I think is the biggest crock of crap I ever heard. It is, right? And a little bit of Disney too, right? So I'm a big fan of Disney and songs and whatnot, but that sets expectations way out of whack with what reality is. So, no, I think that's a terrific point, that relationships are worth it, and they are worth the work. So it is important to put that logical piece first, though, to get in one that you know you're going to be compatible with, or as much as you can, right? You can't be perfectly prescient. But
I also wanted to say that we also, my husband and I also met online, and we had a couple things that we were compatible on, but like when we met, I wasn't sure if I believed in God or not, and I was still like going to churches and like trying to figure out what I believe.
Mhm.
And he's always been like he doesn't care, like if there's a God or if there's not a God, he doesn't care. And that's how he is still today. He's like, I don't care. I'm just gonna live my life. And so and so like that was like he didn't care that whether I believed in God or not, but he didn't go to church or anything like that. But he was there like supporting me no matter what I believed, and also like he's very like scientific and logical person, and I really rule with my heart a lot of the time. So, and he's a little insensitive sometimes, so we kind of complement each other that way. I can be like, okay, you're being insensitive, and he can be like, I am. This is just the facts,
Right.
So there's those things too where you can complement each other. You may not be like compatible, like you think the same, but
Right.
like he's learned, he's a lot more sensitive now than when I met him because I've been able to like tell him this is, sensitive.
Absolutely, yeah. Being logically compatible is not about being the same.
Yeah.
So Jen and I, we listen to different music, we enjoy different activities. She's an extrovert and I'm an introvert. She goes out far, far more often than I do. And I'm totally cool with that because I don't have to go most of the time. So, but she makes me go out and do things. She encourages me to be more fit than I would probably normally be. I'm generally fit, but I don't go out as much as I would, or I wouldn't go out as much. I don't know. I go out more than I would because she's there, right? So she has helped broaden me a little bit, and I've helped broaden her a little bit in different ways. So yeah, no, I think that's a great point, that being compatible is not being the same.
Right.
Because a lot of times being the same,
Boring.
yeah. I mean, sometimes it does work out, and sometimes it doesn't. I mean, it just depends.
Yeah.
So, but we can have, the great thing is, so for me, one of the things was intelligence. I want someone who's intelligent. And she's intelligent in her own way, even in the way that we think is different. She's very smart, got a master's, electrical engineer, etc. But she thinks more slowly and methodically. Doesn't mean that she's slow. She just thinks more slowly and methodically than me. So she's more of a 100% kind of thinker. She wants all the details. She wants to work it all out. I can do things very, very quickly, like pretty well, not 100%. So I'm a really good 90%. I can do things 90%, 6 times as fast as she can do one thing 100%. But it's really tough for me to do something 100%. And so in that way, we even balance each other out. We're so both, and I knew she was smart, so I can tell you this story. I knew she was smart when we played chess together. And she had barely played, but she actually did a really good job for being an untrained player. She also took a really long time, and I was getting really impatient. But I could tell that she was very analytical and put a lot of thought into it. Whereas as I make decisions a little bit more intuitively, but fast, I can do things very quickly. So just different. And I think those are strengths, right? Because she's the one that manages the finances, and she's the one that manages scheduling because she's more critical about those things. Whereas I make certain decisions that just need to be made with maybe a shortage of information. So that's where we both have our strengths and we both use them. So I think it's a great point. Anyone else?
I think one of the hardest things for me in terms of relationships I've had to deal with here recently is when there becomes a toxicity to a relationship, when it in regard to family, where you have to sever ties.
Yeah.
That just, that's some of the hardest one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, because they're toxic.
Yeah.
And this was with my own brother and his wife and so on and so forth. It just,
Everybody's got that.
that's just, it's hard.
It is, especially because it feels like you should be able to make it work.
Sure.
Right? But again, we don't control other people. And it feels like we should be able to compromise or do something, but there's only so much we can give before we're out. Right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of times though, that's a form of communication, right? So when you say, look, I don't appreciate being treated this way, and until you can come around to treating me like a human, then we're done. And you walk away from them and you don't look back. And a lot of times, however many times, like there are people who actually take that, and over time, right, it might take them some years to reflect on it, to realize that, oh wait, maybe I am the asshole. So it feels like, oh, well, I've done a bad thing, I've cut off my own family, but maybe you've given them something. Maybe you've given them the thing that's going to spur them to change, because if everyone keeps giving them what they want, or what they think they want, they're going to keep doing it, right? They have no incentive to change. Yeah, enabling, exactly.
I also want to be a devil's advocate on that too. I feel like this culture now is a lot less family oriented and friendship oriented, and a lot more like social media oriented. And so people are more willing to like cut their families off and their close friends that they've had for years, because now they have all these friends online and they don't need anybody. I have all these friends, but when it really comes down to it, those people aren't there for you.
Yeah.
And you really do need your family and friends, and you need a support network where, you know, as like social media only gets you that far,
Yeah.
you know.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think those are slightly different points. So I think Linda's talking about like extremely toxic,
Right.
like abusive relationships. But so I see also what you're saying,
Yeah.
which is people are willing to give up on any relationship that requires work
Right.
because they have a sense of, oh, well, I have so many friendships when they
Yeah,
have
I'm not
many,
saying that that's.
many acquaintances. So, but that's a fantastic point, and that's why I thought it was important to talk about this, and particularly that concept of work, that you have to work at it, whether it's a friendship or whatever it is. You know, so of course, last week, Jen talked about the work required to build a social network. Like she had to invest in it, invest time, thought, concern, worry, and actual, you know, just energy in building the kinds of networks that are going to help her if she ever needs it. And she does it very deliberately. She's an engineer, right? But it's the same thing with ourselves. Like we need to have friends. We need to have a social net, right? It's what helps us be resilient in the long run. And so this was kind of the micro version of a little bit of what she talked about last time. So I think that is really important and a good point. I work in PR, I work on social media, and I'm not a fan. It is really great for certain things, for discovering ideas or connecting, so particularly with connecting with family that's far flung, right? So moving around a lot. It's nice to be able to send my mom pictures of the kids easily. That's great. But at the same time, people don't limit themselves because they think it's okay. But it's basically the same as alcohol or drugs, because you get dopamine hits when you get the ding or when you see a message. It is literally a drug. And unless you limit yourself in the way you do with alcohol or, you know, whatever bad activities, eating tons of sugar, like you're going to get addicted to it, and it's going to skew your sense of what is real and what is important.
Get an endorphin push
Exactly.
from approval.
Yep. There's really great research out there on it. And so I just went through the other day on Facebook, and I was noticing I was getting all kinds of pop-ups for just different groups and stuff that I'm in. I'm like, I don't need to see these all the time. So I turn them all off so they just show up in the app. So only when I open the app do these notifications show up, unless someone messages me directly. So to me, that was really, really important, because I know this is bad and I work in it all the time. So I wanted to make sure that I'm not getting sucked into it either.
Yeah.
So, but it's one more thing. It's about moderation. So, you know, whether it's food, alcohol, social media.
I'm sorry. I thought I turned it on.
No worries. Like those are the things that are absolutely critical that we manage in our lives, because otherwise we get this false sense of security. So
Sorry, I thought I turned it on.
that's all right. Forgiveness. Right? Forgiveness.
I kind of think there are people out there too that really are addicted to negative in terms of being
Yes.
They get
toxic.
attention. They get attention that way.
Yeah.
Yep. And so that was one of the things Jen talked about last week too, is that the Facebook posts that she sees that get a lot of attention are people being like, oh, I'm lonely, or
Yeah.
oh, you know, I'm having this problem in my relationship. People are like, oh, that's so terrible, whatever. And so Jen has taken the tact of saying, oh, okay, I have this group and this group. If you're interested, you can join these and come out with us, right? She kind of calls her bluff if they are just looking for attention, or if they're actually lonely, gives them an out. Say, please come out with us, right?
Yeah,
But-
I remember bringing that point up, yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing is one, I think it's good because she's actually giving people real opportunity that she didn't necessarily have when I was gone for 6 months. And she's challenging people, right? So we don't grow unless we're uncomfortable. And so they're saying, hey, yeah, it might be scary. You might have to go out with a group that you don't know, but here's your way to become better or help yourself achieve your goal.
Also, social media usually only shows the happy people. You know, you don't
The
really.
curated life.
Yeah, the curated life. You don't really see their struggles and
Right.
what they go through. So in your mind, everyone's happy.
Except
and-
you.
except for you. What's wrong with you? Why is all these people happy, you know?
Yeah.
But it's really not that way. That social media like skews reality a lot.
Yeah, that's honestly why I don't spend time there. So I personally, I only read the news. I don't watch it on TV because that's garbage. And I don't look at social media very much except for the groups that I have opted into. So like my social media feed, I usually don't even bother. Because to me, it's not valuable. It's not adding any value to my life. So just don't do it.
I've met some people that I'm friends with on Facebook in person, and the first thing I'll say is, "Oh, you're my Facebook friend, Alex. Nice to meet you. My name's Eric. Remember me?"
Yeah.
Because they're my Facebook friend. Maybe just by pointing that out, maybe, you know, they'll see that this is not a real friendship.
Yeah.
But it could be.
Yeah.
You know.
Transition it from Facebook to the real world.
Exactly. It's kind of cool. I mean, I've done that with 3 or 4 people I've met.
Yeah. That's good. I like that.
Because I mean, at some point, it's my friend, but right now it's just a Facebook friend because I don't know you.
People, when you recommend counseling and everything, very few people have sat on the other side of that desk or chair.
Mhm.
And just to let you know, for example, we worked at LSUS as a short-term only well health clinic.
Mhm.
So once we determined a genuine psychosis or a clinical
Right.
depression, you know, something that required treatment with chemicals or long-term, alcoholism, drugs, we didn't treat. So we had to immediately in the first meeting determine which of 3 groups I use they fell into, because you need to get rid of the ones that are long-term, because you've got people who are magical thinkers,
Mhm.
okay? They're gonna have crystals and have all this, sit under tents made in triangles, you know, and they're gonna believe any kind of mystical, magical tarot card, and they think, come to counseling, you're gonna go, heal, and that's all, no work on their part, okay? They're not, we can't help them at all.
Right.
Okay. Second group knows there's work to be done. They're not magical thinkers, but they come to counseling once a week to feel good for 1 hour. And then when they go home, they do nothing. They don't do any of their homework assignments.
Right.
We can't help them. We got to get rid of them. Only about a third or less of people come to counseling with realistic expectations, ready to do whatever it takes to overcome the problem they came to you for. You recognize those and you can get them solved in 5-6 weeks of an hour a week.
Yep.
But they do it themselves. You're just bouncing it off. And
Right.
with
And
realistic,
those are the people that really want to work at.
yeah, and they all blame you for saving their lives, don't they? And I tell them, no, you did all the work. All
That's
I
great.
did was sit there with counseling position.
Tell me more about that.
That reminds me of a joke.
Uh-oh.
How many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb?
Only one, but it's got to really want to change.
That's it, you do it.
That's it.
Light bulb has to want to change.
That's
But it's
great.
true. It's true.
So we'll wrap it up today with our usual one thing you were grateful for in the previous week and one thing you're looking forward to in the coming week. So I'll kill the camera feed and we can just talk about it.